Okay, so today is June 29th. My name is Helio Alves. I'm here joined by my colleagues.
Gabrielle Hurd.
Ronan, Hart. And Barry Jurgensen, National Park Service.
Okay, so can you please say your name and spell it for the record?
Sure. James Settles, JamesSettles.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's get started by talking about who you are, where were you born. Tell us about yourself.
Okay. As I said, I'm Jim Settles, born in Ripley in 1950 on a farm about 4 miles outside of town where my parents owned. Grew up in Ripley, went through the school systems here, graduated from the 12th grade here, went from there to the University of Cincinnati. Was in Cincinnati for a number of years, moved to Louisville, then to the suburbs of Chicago, and we've been back in Ripley for about 35 years now. I currently live about a quarter mile from where I was born. We came back to Ripley, and I eventually got into the pastorate. My home church is Bibi Chapel, CME Church. And I got into the ministry and was a minister in the CME Church for 30 years until I retired 3 years ago, and pastored Bibi, my home church, for 26 of those years. We currently still live in that little house we bought when we came back to Ripley, and that's who I am.
All right, thank you. So, can you tell us about your family, about your parents? Are there any stories that you remember from your childhood about your family, about your ancestors?
Well, there's really only one. My great-grandfather, Joseph Settles, and his wife Elizabeth were born slaves, and they lived in northern Kentucky in Mason County in the Maysville area. And then 1863, after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed into law, they escaped, fearing that they would be sold further south. Plus, the emancipation didn't really affect them because it only freed slaves in states that had withdrawn from the Union, and Kentucky did not. But they were in fear of being sold further south, so they did escape. My great-grandfather was a driver for one of the county judges and traveled around and made some contacts in downtown Maysville and in the Ripley area. And they made arrangements for a skiff to be on the shores of the banks of the Ohio in Maysville. And on the first night, he and his wife and their firstborn child, who was only a couple of months old, and 3 others, an uncle and 2 others, made their way from the hills of northern Kentucky down through Maysville, through the backyards. They came to a fence in Maysville between the streets and the river, and they had to climb the fence, and took the baby and threw her over the fence, and the uncle caught her on the other side so that they could make their way onto the riverbank, and they boarded the skiff. They, of course, floated downriver so that the sound of the oars wouldn't be heard. They floated down to just outside of Ripley to a little creek that comes out just outside of Ripley, Eagle Creek. And they released the skiff and made their way up the creek to the home of some farmers who had agreed to to house them. On the second night, he went back and brought out 6 more. So that was the story of them escaping slavery. He raised his family in Ripley, 12 children. He became kind of an entrepreneur. He drove a dray, or had in today's terminology, had a trucking company. he used his horses and trade to haul goods from the riverbank to the stores in Ripley. He had the contract to fill the central water supply cistern in Ripley. And that was his story. During the Civil War, he also enlisted and was in the Ohio Colored Infantry as well.
Wow, that's pretty fascinating. So, after he being able to conquer his freedom, can you share any stories about his involvement in helping others to find freedom? His involvement with the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, really, the only 2 excursions that I know about is the first one and that second night. Beyond that, I don't know that he was active in any other rescues.
Okay.
So I think it was just those 2, as far as I know.
Okay. And do you know, were there any specific routes or safe houses that he was familiar with or that you know about?
He lived with a family. There's still members of that family in the area, the Grove family. They had a couple of farms up Eagle Creek, and they housed with them when they initially came over.
Okay. So you mentioned that he served in the Civil War, right?
Yes.
So what can you tell us about his involvement in the Civil War and how this military service ended up contributing to the cause of abolition and the fight for freedom?
Yeah, not a lot. He, as I said, enlisted in, I think it was the 3rd Ohio Colored Infantry. I don't know of any action that they saw, but we know that it was him. But oddly enough, his enlistment papers and the tombstone that commemorates his service spell the name with SU as opposed to SE, TTLES. Yeah, that's...
Okay. About the church, you mentioned the Bibi Chapel.
Yes.
Right. So can you talk about Joseph Saddle's involvement with the church and how it served the community at that time?
The church was organized from a split in a church. We believe it was either an AME church or a Wesleyan church. And part of the members went to the existing Baptist church, and the other part established Bibi Chapel. Bibi Chapel sits on the property that they were given on Main Street yet today, and he helped to build the church. The logs for the frame of the Hurt church and the foundation came from the farm of my other great-grandfather. But Joseph and his sons helped to build the church, and even they worked on it. The church was founded in 1899 or 1893. They began the building in 1899, but it took them a while to complete it because my father, who was born in 1902, can remember being sent down from the building site to downtown to buy nails for them at the local hardware store. So it took him a while to build it, but once it was up and running and it was established, that church has always been a contributor to the community. I think a beacon of a sanctuary, a place where people could get help, a place of good community, meaning love and nurturing for one another, and active in the local town activities. Yeah.
Okay, and how would you say that his legacy and the church and religion itself has played in your family and in the way you see social justice today?
Well, the CME Church in general, we're a church that our theology is very conservative, but we are very socially active, and that plays out at Bibi as well. We, for a small church, it has always been a church that provides for the needs of others. We currently not only support the activities locally, but we contribute to different causes around the globe. The CME Church, of course, is in Africa and Jamaica, as well as in the continental U.S. But Bibi is active to the point where we take part in the local food pantries, the mobile food pantries. We help people with clothing and just a multitude of things. We are promoters of justice based on the facts as opposed to anything else. And we are probably the most integrated church in the Valley.
Awesome. And how did you find about this connection of your ancestor with the Underground Railroad and with these all this story you're telling us today?
My father talked about it regularly. Eugene Settles, he talked about it regularly. And probably was interviewed more times than I've been regarding it. But it was a story that he would tell long before oral history began to take hold, or before people became interested outside of Ripley. It's a story I heard as a little boy sitting on his lap on the front porch. So it was something that he was proud of, and that's how I found out about it.
Okay, can you elaborate on these stories that your father used to?
Well, he would talk about the escape. He would talk about the uncle who he referred to him as Indian. We have Indian blood in our American Indian, Native American blood in our family. And he said he really took on the part and always used cold water to wash in and things of that nature. And he talked about this growing up with his parents and how active they were in the community. They actually owned a small grocery store. His parents, Ed and Florence Settles, and he talked about that a lot. He talked about his time in school and things of that nature.
Okay, you mentioned like in Native American blood in your family.
Yes.
Can we talk about it a little bit?
Only a little bit, because I've never researched it in great detail. But the story is that the original bloodline of the Settleses that we're a part of came from Middle Kentucky. Two brothers who were taking part in the battle at Blue Licks with their Gaboon's son. And after the battle, and when the Indians dispersed, one of them went further south, and the other came north and wound up in the Maysville, Mesa County area. And eventually, that's where our bloodline began to mix. Eventually, he married one of the slaves, a slave in that area, and it kind of blossomed from there.
Okay. And going back to your family's stories, in your research or from your parents' stories, have you ever come across any particular challenges or obstacles that Joseph Saddles or other ancestors faced while assisting people to escape slaves through the Underground Railroad, through freedom?
Um, I'm going to say no in the sense of escaping. He had that very well planned out and had the help of those who he had contacted. I think the challenge came after escaping and establishing that business. And we think of Ripley as a enlightened community. Well, it really wasn't. There were as many people against abolition as there were abolitionists, and they just tended to allow one another to live and let live. So what that meant was anyone who settled in the area who was not Caucasian had the same struggle of finding work or starting businesses as they would in any other city or state in the nation. I think that's where the struggle was.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and do you have any artifacts or documents or historical evidence that have been preserved in your family to support or illuminate Joseph Saddle's connection to the Underground Railroad and to really help to teach future generations about his legacy?
Yeah, the answer to that is also no. I think we have become more aware of preserving artifacts than we used to be. I can remember at one time the family having articles from the First World War from one of the uncles who served in the military there, but all that's gone. I can remember, I'm sure that if there were any documents, the same thing could be said. Any paper that we would have had has long since disappeared. So all we really have are the documents that show their dates of birth and the record of Joseph's enlistment and those kinds of things. Things that would be public records. We don't have any personal items anymore.
Okay, and what did you do? And what do you do with this understanding of your family history? Do you pass this information along to your other family members? Do you guys share with this information outside the family?
We certainly share it outside the family, but I also share it in the family. And I've actually begun to work with my youngest, my daughter, so that, like me, I followed my father in telling the story. And so that I look forward to her taking on the task at some future time when I'm long gone, and keeping that story alive as people want to hear it.
Okay.
You mentioned that the Bibi Church is the most integrated in the Valley, and that kind of stuck out. I'm just curious, maybe how was that achieved, and what does that mean for the people there?
It just happened. We did not, should I say, recruit specifically non-blacks. The Scenery Church is a historically black denomination. It came out of the Methodist South Episcopal Church, or Methodist Episcopal South Church, following the Civil War. But we are a Christian church, which means that there's no such thing as black religion or white religion or yellow religion or red religion. There's just Christ. So we've always been an open church. And we just began to pick up people. It's a very friendly church, a very loving church. And I think that we had a member some years ago, she's gone home now, but she would call people that she knew in the community anytime we were doing something, having a dinner or a special program, and invite them. And some of that just took. We have a family that's members now that are there specifically because of her invitation. So yeah, it just happened.
That's really lovely. That's something that sticks out reading about abolitionists, is that it seems like the biggest motivator for them was faith. And that's like a strong through line that you see in the construction of these churches and cultivating these communities. How do you see maybe that through line through your family or other members of the community from that history, up to 100 years ago till now, of that through line of faith?
I think it's very important. 100 years ago, the church was the central activity for a black community, whether they believed or not. That's the place where people gathered. That's the place where you spent your time. That was how you get your recreation. That was your tool for education around the fireplace at night. It was reading the Bible was what you did as a family unit, so that your connection to Christ was very important. So I think it just flows through. I think that the idea of justice is centered around the fact that in Christianity there are some things that you get anchored to. It's not just my opinion versus your opinion. It is because God said so. And I think that it flows through the whole ideal of freedom for all and equality for all and justice for all.
Absolutely.
I had two questions. One is, how has slavery been discussed in your family throughout the years? And then also, what was it like growing up just a few miles away from where your family escaped slavery?
Slavery is not something that we talked about a lot. It is what it is, a harsh existence. I think that personally, I take pride in those who remained in slavery and were unable to escape simply for enduring. I think that when we look at our lives today and the opportunities that we have, we should be ashamed sometimes of our complaining because of what our ancestors went through. As far as growing up close to the place where there's a lady who I've had contact with throughout the years about historical things, who knows the exact plantation, if I can use that my great grandparents were slaves on. and I have chosen not to know it. I don't want to know. Mainly because I'm just a human, and I'm sure that there would be some animosity toward that area. And if I knew it, I don't even know the name of the owner. I don't want to know. She knows, but I don't want to know. For that very same reason, I'm sure that I may have had dealings with some of his ancestors. But as I said, Christian or not, I am human, and I'm sure that that would affect my attitude toward them. I choose to, I guess, be more influenced by what my great-grandfather did in escaping and what he did in establishing a business and what he did in raising 12 children in a hostile environment. And that I take more pride in and put more store to than anything else.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. That was great. Thank you. So I guess a question stemming from that is, could you tell us about any particular struggles your family went through as, your family grew up in Ripley?
They went through the same struggles that every other black family goes through. If you think about the population of this town, it's dwindled, but the black population has dwindled more, primarily because there wasn't any opportunity. There was no jobs for them, no future. So that even I left and came back. When I was working outside the church, I traveled back and forth from Ripley to Cincinnati to earn a living for most of those years. So the struggle was real. And while the opportunities today are much greater, the struggle remains. It's inevitable. We are, I think, naturally drawn toward those who are like us, which means that if the hiring agent is Asian, they will more likely prefer Asians as opposed to anything else. And that just carries across the cultural line, I think. So the struggle is real, and we have to be cognizant of that and aware of that. And then I think we can learn to deal with one another as strictly as human beings on merit, and that's the struggle.
You said you prefer to focus on your ancestors' life after getting freedom.
Correct.
Can you tell us how did your ancestors' experiences and involvement with helping others to also get freedom shape the subsequent generations of your family, and how and if there are any specific values or principles that guide you today?
Well, I think that that an entrepreneurial spirit pervades. I don't know any of us who are entrepreneurs today, but some have been. But I think that it spurs us to try to do better. So by that I have nephews who are basically my same age who are all college educated or own their own. Well, we have at least one who owns his own business. We have people who are working in places that do assist others, cancer research and those kinds of things. But I think that all stems from that spirit of not just surviving, but overcoming. And I think that that's the legacy that we pass on to overcome. Not necessarily to excel, but I think you do excel when you overcome.
Excellent. Excellent. And can you tell us about any relationships or collaborations that your ancestors had with other abolitionists or key figures in the Underground Railroad?
Well, I know that they were. I'm going to use the word friends with John Parker. I don't know that he assisted him in any way because that kind of would have been double jeopardy with the laws of the day. And he came, my grandfather, great grandfather, escaped in '63, so that a lot of that work was already done. But their families knew each other. I know that his sons knew John Parker's son daughters, but their relationships beyond that, I don't know. They lived next door to now General Young. And he would have been their instructor for some of the kids' instructor in school for part of their time there. General Charles Young. But beyond that, I don't know of any other. I don't know that they interface with the Rankins or anything like that.
Okay. Okay. Is there anyone else in your family besides you that is keeping alive these stories and really preserving this story?
Well, the answer, I guess, is yes. I know that at least a number of the nieces and nephews are preserving, and I know that my son, one of my sons, is passing on to his children, so that, and then the other sons has. The mother of his children has expressed interest in keeping this story alive. So yes, I think it's something that has touched their heartstrings, and they want to know as much as they can about the history and to perpetuate it.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and that is helpful because when you're interested, you research, and when you do research, you find even more information. So, do you know if are they finding any additional informations that may help to illuminate your ancestors' trajectory?
I don't know of any additional information. I know that at least two of them have done ancestral researches, but I don't know of any additional information that they've turned up.
Speaking of your family, is there anything that from the time that they were enslaved or the time after when they reached freedom that they told you about as cultural traditions, anything that they told you about or wanted passed on? Things like...
Yeah, no. Yeah, the answer, I'm going to say no. Primarily, I think that I was a very late baby in my parents' life. I like to say they had two daughters, and then they had a son that was a surprise, and then they had me, who was a total shock. So that generation that was before them, which had been the generation of my grandfather, most of them had passed on by the time I got of age to hear and listen and retain. So I didn't really get to talk a lot with that group. So any cultural activities that came through them has been lost, I guess, or it's become such a part of our lives that we don't realize where it came from.
And then I was wondering, could you speak more about, you were saying people were crossing over a fence to get to the river and they threw a baby over it. Do you know which relative that was?
That was my grandfather, my great-grandfather, Joseph and Elizabeth. The baby's name is Mary Alice, all of which are buried out here at the cemetery. The uncle is kind of a mystery, and I'm thinking perhaps we talked about him a little bit. My father sharing stories about him acting like an Indian. I'm thinking that perhaps that blood came through my grandmother's side, and that he was her uncle, and that he was the perhaps full blood Indian. Now I don't know whether he was Cherokee or Shawnee, but that would be interesting to find out. But those were the ones to participate in the fence toss. Fortunately, the baby did not begin to cry, or the as they called them, paddy rollers would have who were patrolling the banks of the Ohio would have heard them and caught them. But yeah, the fence was too high, I guess, to climb over with the baby in their arms, and so they had to toss her over.
And then another thing that stuck out to me since we've come here, I think we hear a lot about the story of people crossing the Ohio River, and they talk about it like it's just a skip over a stream. But the river is quite wide. Have you ever heard of, like, how did they get across it? Did they get in the water? Did they find a boat?
My ancestors came across by boat.
Okay.
They had made arrangements for a small boat, a skiff, to be anchored on or hidden on the bank of the Ohio on the Maysville side, near Maysville, in Maysville, and they floated down and then rowed to Eagle Creek. But the river was very different than it is today. In some places, it was quite shallow. There were sand barges in the middle of the river. So it was quite different than it is today. Yeah.
Do you know, I'm sorry if I'm asking hard questions,
That's all right.
but do you know how they made the arrangement to get the boat? That's interesting.
My great grandfather was a driver for this judge, and so that gave him the opportunity when he would drive the judge to different functions, festivals, or to wherever. It gave him opportunity to talk with people and to meet with people, and that's how it happened. He utilized that opportunity to make arrangements.
So he met someone as their driver for that day, and they helped him.
He met someone as he was driving for. He would take and drive him to a place, and unlike Uber, he didn't just drop him off and go on. He stayed and waited, with the buggy and the horse. So yeah.
Oh, so I'm sorry, I'm getting into the specifics
That's
of it.
okay.
I'm very interested. He was talking to someone while waiting. He met someone, walked up to him, or started a conversation.
Correct.
That's so interesting. So we don't know who that person is. They could be anyone out there.
Could be anyone out there.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
And how did you find this information? Can you tell us about the process of your research to put everything together and to, reconstruct this amazing story of resistance?
Most of my knowledge comes from my father. Very little of it comes from my own research. I did verify the records of my great grandfather's enlistment and things of that nature. But beyond that, most of my information comes from my father.
Okay, and did your father tell you anything about how your great-grandfather's life was before before freedom?
Actually, no. He the only thing he ever said about their life before escaping was that there were two sets of settlers on the plantation. One set was house slaves, and the other set was field slaves, and our set was the field slaves. Yeah.
I'm always interested in the little tiny details. So, how did you ever hear about things like how did they leave the house? How did they get off the initial plantation land? Do you know how those arrangements were made, or was it just a run in the night?
Well, yeah, just a run in the night. He only brought 6 the first night and went back for 6 more. Now, when I talk about going back for 6 more, I don't know if that was prearranged or if he went back to the plantation and got them, or he met them somewhere along the way. But we just know that he made 2 trips. As far as the first group, I'm sure that they just made it up among themselves after he made the arrangements for the boat. Just to leave, and that's what they did. Under the cover of darkness, they just stole away.
So thinking about that, the immense bravery to go back and put yourself in danger that way, how did you feel when you first learned about that? Like, how did that make you feel about your family and how yourself?
Well, I don't know that it made me feel any particular way about myself. But it does say just that that is a selfless act because you are in danger. You're in danger while you're at every step of the process, making the plans while you're carrying out the initial escape, and then going back. You're not really safe on the banks of the Ohio, in Ohio, because of the laws of that time. Anybody could have turned them in, and then the people that they made arrangements with to stay with could have been people who would have just at a whim turned them in if they wanted to. So it was all fraught with danger, but going back that second time just kind of heightens that. So yeah, it makes me feel proud about him and his activities and his actions. But that doesn't really, in and of itself, bolster me. We're each one have to act on our own and climb our own ladder, fight our own battles. What that does for us is we, I think, try to improve on what others have done before us and build on what others have done before us. So from that sense, that's what it does for me.
Yeah. Do you know anything about who came in the first trip versus the second trip?
No, beyond my great-grandfather, his wife Elizabeth, the unnamed uncle, and Mary Alice, the baby. I don't know who the 6th or 7th person was, nor the other group that came after that.
You mentioned that he had a friendship with John Parker. Is that correct?
What I said is he would have known John Parker. Yeah, I don't know how friendly John Parker was with anybody, but he was very stealthy, I think, even after the end of the war. But yeah, they would have known each other, and because I know that the kids knew each other. So yeah.
Okay, so do you know if there were any, if he was involved actually in any networks before gaining his freedom that helped him to escape, and then that pushed him to also help others to escape?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if he was involved in any way in any other escapes or worked with anybody. I don't know that he was an agent for John Parker before he escaped. I don't know that he was helping others to make their way out of northern Kentucky before he made his escape. That's just not part of the history that's been passed down.
And do you know how did he came about this route from there to here?
Yeah, again, he would have had some knowledge simply because of his freedom to move about the county with this judge that he was a driver for. He would have had some occasion, perhaps, even to come over into Ohio, which is probably how he met the Groves to make arrangements with them. But beyond that, yeah, no particulars.
Okay, and in what ways do you believe that your family's story and its contributions to freedom and to the Underground Railroad should actually be remembered and acknowledged?
I think in the sense that they were just an ordinary family of the day who did some extraordinary things to perpetuate the family and give the family the best opportunities that they could to stay together. It was very common to sell the children off or even the spouse off, and that's what they were afraid of, being separated and sold off further south. And of course, going further south would have meant harsher treatment, no doubt. But so I think that is how we remember the story, that they were just an ordinary family doing what they had to do to survive the time and to remain a family.
So I had a minute to kind of look through some of the exhibits and stuff in this building. And it seems like there's some very good stuff here, but I'm curious if you have if there's any other ways that you think aspects of your family's history and this community's history should be commemorated. Other buildings that should be considered landmarks, places where there should be placards or items that should be in museums.
I'm going to say probably not. I guess I'm pleased and happy that the one placard or the poster is here. You can find a similar one at the National Underground Railroad Museum in Cincinnati. To be acknowledged in those places at all, I think, is a great honor. The houses where he lived, the land that he owned, there's no building standing anymore. We don't own any of that property anymore. So I'm going to say probably not. While I am proud of what my great-grandfather accomplished in escaping, I'm probably prouder about what he did afterwards. But that's what America is built on. People doing the very same thing that he did for his family, doing it for their families, giving them a better opportunity and helping them to have a leg up. We like to say that we want our kids to have it better than we had it. Well, that's kind of a misstatement. We want our kids to be able to have the same opportunities we had or more opportunities than we had, and then they kind of have to take it from there. But it's the opportunity and what you do with it, and I think that's commemoration enough. Mm-hmm. So when I look at his ancestors, his great-great-great-grandchildren and whatnot, and what they're doing and how they're integrated into society, I think that's a great legacy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Now, I have a personal question for you. How did this knowledge make you feel?
Say it again.
How did all this knowledge about your family, about your ancestors, how did it make you feel?
Well, I'd be lying if I said I didn't have a twinge of pride. I used to tell my congregation that my biggest stumbling block was pride. So I'm very careful. I'm very careful about how prideful I get. But I'd be lying if I didn't say it did give me some twinge of pride in knowing that he said enough is enough and did something about it, regardless of what the risks were. He felt that freedom and keeping that young family together was more important than how painful the risk or the outcome could have been if it had gone the other way. I wonder if I could be that brave. It gives me cause to just stop and think, if I faced such a challenge, how I would respond. But it's good to know that somewhere in my history, someone did the right thing and made a better life for those that he loved.
Okay. Are you aware of any museums or historical sites that tell your family's story?
It's here at the Rankin House, but it's also, as I said, at the National Underground Railroad Museum in Cincinnati in the same form, in a placard. There are a number of newspaper articles out there, a couple from my father, a couple from me now. KET in Kentucky did an interview of my dad and I both some years ago that's still out there and making its round. I know that school systems, at least in this area, still show that occasionally during Black History Month. So the story is out there and being told and being preserved in those ways, yeah.
Okay, and you said that the buildings that your ancestors owned are no longer there,
Correct.
or that your family don't have them anymore, right? But are the people in these places aware of the story of the history that happened there, the persons that lived or worked there?
They're aware of the area in which he lived and raised his family, because we've had the conversation, and again because it was next to Colonel Young, where his parents lived and he lived. So we're aware in that sense. I don't know that the museum in Cincinnati knows anything about it. I would think that they probably did. Mr. Westmoreland was a frequent person who liked to tell the story. He used to like to embellish it a little bit, though. So I'm sure that he was aware of where they lived as well. I'm not sure that answers your question, but yeah, I think the knowledge is there, but I don't know of the necessity for a marker. I guess, well, I just think of the thousands and thousands that did the same thing as my great grandfather did. Is it necessary for him to have a marker and them not? I think sometimes that marker has to be just what we're doing now, just passing it on to family members and keeping that alive through family members and letting family members know what they did. And that's more important than where they did it.
Awesome, excellent. What else would you like to add to the record that we didn't discuss?
I can't think of a thing. Joseph Settles was who he was. a young man growing up in hard times who made a hard decision that benefited his family of that day, and I believe his family has come in subsequent generations, and hopefully will continue to do so as we tell the story.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're very
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.